All of us have listened to stories being told when we were little ones. As we grew up, we must have read some stories. If you haven't been an ardent reader, all of you have read short stories for your literature lessons. Today, we learn how to write a short story. When we were young, our stories began with the words, "Once upon a time." My dear children, please do not do that. That sounds very babyish. Now that you are a grown-up student, your stories should have more interesting beginnings. Writing a short story is a skill worth cultivating. Great writers have been able to use the elements of the short story with such precision that the reader is caught up in the action of the story. This is a mark of a good story and our goal as a writer. The elements of a short story are A. Setting, B. Characterization, C. Plot, D. Conflict, E. Climax, F. Resolution, G. Theme, and H. Point of view. There is a story that resides in all our minds. We need the appropriate hints to bring out our stories. Storytelling is an art that can fetch us a living as well as fame if cultivated well. Storytelling is not just a God-gifted talent. It requires regular practice. Pick up your pen and turn over a new page and hey presto, your story begins. Develop characters, establish a plot, define a narration perspective, draft a story. This is the way to write a short story. While creating a setting to your story, keep in mind the place, time, and environment. Place, where? At home, in a store, in a jungle, or on a boat. Time is when, in the morning, which season, which year, be as specific as possible. Environment, what, cold, dark, stormy, rainy, once again be as descriptive as possible. The setting affects what happens in the story. Remember, the setting can change and characters react to the setting. Characterization is the way in which an author shows the personality of a character. Characterization is a technique writers use to make characters come to life. When you write a short story, make sure you give your characters a name and some definite qualities and also let them speak. In other words, there should be some dialogue in your story. Learn to set up the plot. Your story should consist at least of an introduction, an initiating incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. You can write a simple visual with descriptions of what would happen in each of these stages. Having this done will help you keep focused when writing the story. And you can easily make changes to it so that you are able to keep a steady flow as you write the full story. A conflict is needed in a story. Conflicts can be of the following types. A. Character versus character. B. Character versus nature. C. Character versus society. And D. Character versus self. Let's talk about the basic plot diagram. At first you have the introduction or the opening or the exposition shown as a flat line. Then you have rising action. The line goes up. Now, the point where the exposition meets the rising action is the point of conflict. If there is rising action, naturally there is falling action. So you can see the line coming down. And the point where rising action has met falling action is the point of climax. The last flat line that you see is the resolution or the conclusion. The climax of the story is the most interesting point of it. The success of a story often depends on how the author, and that is you, handles the climax. Derived from a Greek word which means staircase or ladder, the climax can be the turning point of the story. An example of the climax of a story can be the part when the prince goes in search of the girl who had left her glass slippers behind the previous night, as narrated in the story of Cinderella. Note that at that point there are two possibilities opened in front of the reader. The first and the more probable is that the prince will not find Cinderella, who obviously will not be allowed to appear before him. The second and the more romantic one, he will somehow get a glimpse of her and have her try the slipper. The storyteller must be wise enough to feel the pulse of the readers and direct his climax accordingly. Let's now deal with fall in action and denouement. A steady rise in action leads to the climax. A gradual fall in action follows the climax. Make sure that the conflicts that were created when the action arose are solved when the action falls. Denouement is the final outcome of the story. Quite like the way we untie a knot, the denouement solves the complications of the plot. A word of advice: do not hurry with your denouement. Take your time and let your plot unwind artistically. A good story also has a theme. The theme includes the life lessons, the moral messages about life or about human nature that you communicate with your story. Remember, in order to get good marks, your story should always have an educative theme. It is common for stories to have multiple themes. The theme can be stated explicitly or implicitly. For example, fables explicitly state the theme at the end, whereas modern short stories do not do so. Unlike the main idea, the theme can often be found at the conclusion of the story. Most often, readers have to infer the theme based on character traits, motivations, actions, emotions, and values. With that, we come to the end of our lesson on how to write a short story. I hope you will all write short stories with an educative theme, with characters, characters that have names, characters who speak, and you will use dialogue, and your stories will have a logical conclusion and will no doubt be age appropriate. Remember, these are certain extra points that you should keep in mind while writing a story for your examination. Thank you.